Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Thank you for supporting me all this while. Alright, so today we are going to look into chapter 11, inheritance. Okay, subtopic 11.1 on monohybrid inheritance. Alright, so I hope you are ready with your pen and paper and let's take notes while we learn. So what is inheritance? Now we know that all organisms can transfer their genetic information to their offsprings. So the transmission of this genetic information from parents to offspring from generation to generation is called inheritance. Genetics, on the other hand, is the study of heredity and variation of inherited characteristics. And genetic information refers to the genes which determine the characteristics of an organism. Alright, so before we go further, let's look at the learning standards. Alright, so in this lesson, you are going to be able to describe the meaning of monohybrid cross, explain a monohybrid cross based on Mendel's experiment, and then differentiate the terms related to inheritance, so all these traits here you can see, and then you're going to construct monohybrid cross diagrams, and then determine the genotypic and phenotypic ratio of filial generation in monohybrid cross, and also to describe Mendel's first law. Next, let's look at the genetics vocabulary, all the terms that is related to inheritance. Characteristics is a heritable feature of an organism. It is transferred through gametes from parents to offspring. Each characteristic is controlled by a gene. Examples are height and eye color. Trait, on the other hand, is a variation of a specific characteristics that can actually be displayed in an organism. Each characteristic has its own trait. So a trait is controlled by a pair of alleles. A trait can be dominant or recessive. For example, if height is a characteristic, then its traits are short or tall. If the characteristic is color of seed, so the trait will be yellow or green. And if the characteristics is eye color, so the trait will be either black, brown, green, or blue. Genes and allele. Gene is the basic unit of inheritance, which consists of DNA segment located on a specific locus of a chromosome. Now, one gene controls a particular characteristic in an organism. For example, we have gene for eye color, nose shape, or gene for even making insulin. Now, one gene exists in pairs called alleles. So, one gene has two alleles on the same locus of a pair of homologous chromosomes. Allele is an alternative form of gene for specific trait that is located on the same locus of a pair of homologous chromosomes. Now, alleles can exist in two different forms. It's either dominant or recessive. So one allele is located on the paternal chromosome and the other is located on the maternal chromosome. So a dominant allele is usually expressed in capital letter. For example, allele for purple flower, so maybe you want to put it as capital P. Alright, so the recessive allele on the other hand is represented by lowercase letter. For example, white flower is recessive, so we use small letter P. But it has to be in the same letter or alphabet, all right, for one trait. Now, so a pair of alleles will actually determine a trait. For example, if a trait is tall or short for the characteristics of height, it is determined by the pair of allele. Phenotype and genotype. Now, the phenotype of an organism is the observable traits of an organism. It is the feature or trait displayed in an organism. So the phenotype of an organism is determined by its genotype. For example, for the characteristics of height, the phenotype is either short or tall. Other examples, for example, we have the type of hair, we have curly or straight hair, and for the type of earlobe, we have free or attached earlobes. Genotype, on the other hand, refers to the genetic composition of an organism that cannot be seen. So it determines the phenotype or the trait displayed. So it is the combination of a paired alleles in a gene for a particular trait in a characteristics. So we have two types of genotype. We have homozygous, when both alleles of the gene are identical, and heterozygous, where one allele is dominant and the other is recessive. We will see that further in the terms. Okay, so when we talk about alleles, so we have here homozygous allele and also heterozygous allele. Now, homozygous allele is when both alleles of a gene are identical. So we have here homozygous dominant, where both alleles are dominant. If you can look at here, it is written in capital letter or a small letter. So the capital one is homozygous dominant. Alright, so both alleles found on the chromosome is identical and it is dominant. And homozygous recessive is where both alleles are recessive. Both alleles are recessive, so we write it in a small letter. Now, heterozygous is where one allele is dominant and the other is recessive. So we have here capital B and small b. Okay, so dominant, capital, recessive, we write in small letter. So if it's two different alleles, okay, so we call it as heterozygous. Now, dominant allele is the allele that shows its trait when it is present and suppresses the effect of recessive allele. So when there is dominant allele present, the recessive one is not looked into. Okay, and recessive allele is the allele which shows its trait when both alleles are recessive. Okay, so we use small letter. For example, okay, if it's let's say B for black, okay, B for black, dominant, and small b is for white, which is recessive. Okay, so BB is black. B and B is also for black hair. For example, we're talking about black hair. Okay, so BB is for black hair because both are dominant, homozygous dominant. And BB here, this is heterozygous. So it is heterozygous, but we have dominant allele here. So this dominant allele will suppress the effect of this recessive allele. So this is still considered having black hair. But if we have both allele recessive, then only it will show the characteristics of a recessive allele. Okay, so this will be white hair. Never mind, don't worry, we will see further in this lesson. Okay, so dominant trait and recessive trait is what we have seen in our previous slide related to dominant allele and also recessive allele. Now, dominant trait is expressed when both alleles are dominant alleles or one dominant allele is paired with a recessive allele. For example, we have here, okay, so we have BB capitals or 1B capital and 1B small. So the genotype can be either homozygous dominant, this is homozygous dominant, all right, and heterozygous when one dominant allele is present. Okay, so hence there will be more people with the dominant trait of a particular characteristics. Recessive trait is only expressed and displayed when there is only recessive allele present. There is no dominant allele to actually suppress its expression. Okay, so the genotype can only be homozygous recessive. Okay, when both alleles are recessive. So a recessive trait is always homozygous recessive. As such, there will be less people with a recessive trait of a particular characteristics. For example, we have here, this is dominant allele for brown eye, and this capital small b here is for recessive blue eye allele. Okay, so this is known as allele and this is known as trait. Okay, brown eyes or blue eyes. So these are the trait that is carried by this allele. Okay, now we look at parental generation and also filial generation. Okay, this is related to when we are going to do the monohybrid and dihybrid cross. Now, parental generation is the first generation of two individuals which are crossed to predict or analyze the genotypes of their offspring. The parents are usually purebreds for a particular characteristics. For example, a cross between parents which are homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive, all right, for a particular characteristics. Okay, so for example, if we have a tall and short, Okay, so we have tall father, short mother, for example. All right. Now, then the filial generation will be the successive generation as a result of a cross between individuals of purebred parental generation. So the offspring from parental generation is called first filial generation, or we call it as F1. Okay, F1 generation. F1 generation meaning first filial generation. And the offspring from first filial generation, F1 generation, these are called as F2 generation, okay, which is the second filial generation. So we have F1 and F2 generation from the parent generation. Don't worry, we will see this when we cross later on. Okay, now we talk about purebred and also hybrid. What is purebred? What is hybrid? Now, purebred refers to an organism which carries two identical alleles for a trait. For example, here we have homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive parent. So like what I said just now, okay, we have the same characteristics. Okay, so the offspring usually have the same genotype and characteristics of the parents. And purebred organism, they can be homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. Hybrid, on the other hand, is the product of mating between two purebred varieties. Okay, so the hybrid produced is usually heterozygous. So it has two alleles, one from each parent. So one is dominant and the other is recessive. For example, two different homozygous purebred individuals for fur color. Okay, let's say we have a fur color black. Okay, so purebred will be BB and BB. So if we cross them, okay, so it would produce a hybrid, which is heterozygous. All right. Okay, so we are done with the genetic vocabularies or terms. Now, let me ask you a few questions before we go further into monohybrid cross. All right, so now if you look at the picture over here, we have a pea plant flower, which is purple in color. All right, so after pollination, what flower color plants do we expect of this flower? Think about it. Are there possibilities of different color flowers after pollination? Yes or no? If no, why not? Now, we have here purple and white flower, pea plant. Now, what if these two plants undergo cross-pollination? What color of flowers would you expect? And why? Would it be a combination of both colors? Or more purple, more white? Which color will be produced more? Now, so this is the concept that is done, okay, that is figured out by Gregor Mendel. Okay, so Gregor Mendel actually carried out many inheritance experiments on his garden pea plants. Okay, from his experiment on inheritance, he proposed Mendel's first and second law, and he is known as the father of modern genetics. So Mendel is also the first scientist to propose the theory that characteristics of parents are transferred to their offspring through male and female gametes. Okay, so the development of this genetics began during the lifetime of Gregor Mendel, which is around 1822 to 1884. Okay, he was an Augustine priest first, but he has conducted many experiments on inheritance, okay, in his garden. Okay, and Mendel's work laid the foundation for the basic genetic principles. All right, so and as a result, his finding on inheritance, and he is known as the father of genetics. So Mendel's garden is where Mendel actually analyzed the observable traits of peas growing in his monastery garden. And why pea? Okay, why did Mendel choose pea? Is because it is easily grown. Okay, it can bear many seedlings. It has both male and female reproductive structure. It has a short generation interval. All right, and it possesses contrasting traits or characteristics that are obvious. So the 7 traits of pea plant that Mendel actually figured out. Okay, so we have seed shape, seed color, pod shape, pod color, flower position, and also plant height. All right. So monohybrid cross here is done, and dihybrid cross is also done using Mendel's theory related with the pea plant. Okay, now we talk about monohybrid inheritance first. Now, monohybrid inheritance is a genetic cross between two individuals that involve the inheritance of one characteristics only. So, mono means one characteristics. So, monohybrid inheritance is the inheritance of one characteristics from the parents to the offspring from generation to generation. So, Mendel actually crossed a purebreed, purebreed tall pea plant with a purebreed dwarf pea plant. So, that is why we have homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive over here. Now, the cross product between the two purebreed plant was the first generation, the F1 generation, first filial generation, which consisted only tall pea plants, but it is heterozygous. So this shows that the tall trait is dominant, whereas the dwarf trait is recessive. Then Mendel crossed the first filial generation by self-pollination, all right? But this time, the ratio of tall plants to dwarf plant, if in the F2 or the second filial generation, was 3:1. That means they have 3 tall and 1 dwarf plant, compared to the first generation just now, where all the plants are tall. Okay, let's look at the monohybrid cross diagram. Now, a monohybrid cross diagram can be used to explain Mendel's monohybrid cross. So here we have B capital, okay, which represents the dominant allele for purple flower, and a small b over here represents the recessive allele for white flower, okay, of the pea plant. Now, in parental generation, there is a pair of alleles which determines the characteristics of the color of the flower, which are located on the parent's homologous chromosome. So we have here a purebreed purple flower plant and a purebreed white flower plant. Okay, so we have here homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive. All right, so then according to this Mendel's first law, okay, during the formation of gametes, okay, through meiosis, okay, the alleles will segregate and only one allele is present in each gamete. So this is because a pair of homologous chromosome will separate during anaphase 1 of meiosis. So we have here in the gamete, okay, allele dominant and allele recessive. Alright, so during fertilization, random fertilization will occur to produce all purple flower, okay, in the first filial generation with a heterozygous, okay, genotype. Okay, so we have here capital B and small b, but it is still purple because the presence of a dominant allele, okay, the capital B for purple flower. Then what Mendel did was to self-pollinate the first filial generation. Okay, self-pollinate means to pollinate between the heterozygous genotype flower just now. Okay, it's purple and purple. Alright, so phenotype is the same, but genotype is different from the parent cell. Now, the offspring of this purple flower plant, okay, in the first filial generation, okay, is heterozygous genotype, so it's self-pollinated. And during the formation of gamete over here, the paired heterozygous alleles, okay, for the each purple flower plant will separate, and only one, okay, allele, okay, will be present in each gamete. So we have here gametes separated after meiosis. So as a result, two types of gametes are formed from each parent. Okay, so we have gamete, okay, from one parent and the other. Then random fertilization happens again, okay, to produce the F2 generation. Okay, and the generation, the F2 generation has a phenotypic ratio of 3 purple flower, okay, and 1 white flower. All right, so now this is the concept, but how do we actually draw this monohybrid cross? So let's actually go through that again. Okay, so from just now, we see that in the parent generation, we have here the purebreed dominant and recessive, produces a heterozygous allele, okay, in the first filial generation. Now, when the first filial generation is cross breed or self-pollinated, all right, so it produces 3:1 ratio of 3 purple flower and also 1 white flower. So how do we get that? Is actually we can use a Punnett square. Okay, we can use a Punnett square where we lay down the gametes just now. Okay, after meiosis they form gamete. Okay, and this gamete we can cross them. Okay, so we have here capital B and B, so we have this one BB. Okay, purple flower. And then this B and this B, you still get a purple flower but heterozygous. Okay, same goes with this B and this B over here, you get a heterozygous purple flower. And lastly, okay, 2 recessive allele, okay, forms a white flower. So in this case, the phenotype or the phenotypic ratio is 3:1. That means 3 purple to 1 white. But the genotype ratio will be 1:2:1. Why is this? Okay, so 1 BB, 2 heterozygous, and 1 recessive. Okay, homozygous, recessive. 1 homozygous dominant, 2 heterozygous, and 1 homozygous recessive. Okay, this is based on monohybrid cross. Now, let's draw the diagram again. Now, in this case, let's use a different characteristics, okay, besides the purple flower. Now, let's use, let's say we have the parental genotype. I'm just going to use short form over here. Okay, parental genotype. We use TT, okay, for tall, dominant, and dwarf. Okay, so tall and dwarf. So this will be phenotype, phenotype, parental phenotype. So we cross them, okay, then they will undergo meiosis, okay, meiosis and produce gametes. Okay, so they undergo meiosis, they produce 1 allele gamete over here, and then we cross them, okay, after fertilization, okay, and then we have first filial generation. Okay, we can use the phenotype, okay, and also the genotype. So the genotype will be heterozygous. Okay, phenotype will be all tall plants. Okay, all tall plants. Now, then from here we self-pollinate. Okay, we self-pollinate the first filial generation. Now in this case, after meiosis, the gametes that are formed is this, correct? Okay, the capital T and the small t, these are the gametes that are formed after meiosis. Then we can cross them. Okay, we can either use the Punnett square for fertilization. Okay, but since this is monohybrid cross, what I like to do is just cross them like this. Okay, so here and this one, so we get TT, and then this one crosses with this one, we get TT. Then this one crosses with this one, you get also heterozygous, and this one and this one, you get the homozygous recessive. So from here you can see we have this is tall, this is also tall, this is tall, and this is dwarf. Okay, so from here, this is your F2 generation. Okay, this will be the genotype and this will be the phenotype. So when they ask you to calculate the ratio, you can say 3 tall, okay, 3 tall to 1 dwarf. This is phenotypic ratio. If they ask you genotypic ratio, that will be 1 BB to 2 BB to 1 homozygous recessive. Okay, so it depends on the question. Sometimes question asks you percentage. So here 75% will be tall to 25% dwarf. Okay, so the ratio for the F2 generation is 75%. Okay, 75% tall to 25% short or dwarf. So that is how you do. So try to do more exercises on drawing the schematic diagram. If you have any problem, you can also chat with me in the comment box so we can further discuss about it. So Mendel's first law, okay, Mendel's first law is the law of segregation. Okay, so based on his experiment on monohybrid cross, he proposed this first law. Okay, so first law, or the law of segregation, what does it say is that a characteristics of an organism is controlled by a pair of allele. All right, and only one of the allele pair is actually inherited in a gamete. So Mendel's first law states that each characteristics of an organism is controlled by a gene or a pair of alleles, and during gamete formation, the two alleles segregate from each other and each gamete has only one allele from each pair. Right? So that is the Mendel's first law. And during fertilization, a zygote form possesses two alleles, okay, for a specific characteristics. And fertilization is random, so genotypic combination, which is homozygous dominant, shows that dominant trait, okay, and whereas the homozygous recessive shows recessive trait. And heterozygous genotype is a combination of dominant and recessive allele, which shows the dominant trait. Now, checkpoint. Okay, let's check whether we understand what is going on or not. All right, number one, which of the following is a correct description of the term phenotype? A variant of characteristics, alternative form of the same gene, the genetic constituent of an organism, or the outward appearance or expressed trait of an organism? Yes, it's the outward appearance or expressed trait of an organism. Number two, a heterozygous hamster with a black fur. Heterozygous hamster, what do you say? If black fur, let's say one dominant and one recessive heterozygous, is crossed with a hamster with grey fur. Grey is probably recessive. Okay, so we have here BB. Now, black fur is dominant over grey fur. What is the phenotype ratio of the F1 generation? So this you have to cross. Okay, you have to draw the diagram. Try to draw the diagram. Okay, and tell me what's the answer. Whether all have the grey fur, all have black fur, or 3:1, or 1:1. Which one? So if you cross it, you should get one black fur to one grey fur. And number three, the diagram shows a pair of homologous chromosomes. Okay, what is represented by TT? What is that? A chromatin, a chromosome, a genotype, or a phenotype? Yes, so that is definitely the genotype. Okay, there's another question here. All right, Mendel's first law, characteristics of an organism is determined by a pair of genes located at the same locus of the pair of a homologous chromosome, and only one of the pair of genes can be present in a gamete. Now, illustrate above statement using the following cross. So we have here, okay, black mouse and white mouse. So according to the first law, this is supposed to be purebreed. Okay, purebreed parent. Okay, parent here will be genotype. So as usual, you cross it, you should get B here, okay, and B here, and then undergo fertilization, you get BB, all black mouse. And then you have to cross-pollinate the first filial generation, you get this as gamete after undergoing meiosis. Alright, and then you cross it, you should get BB and this. Alright, so this is your second generation. So this is your F1, this is your F2. Okay, this is gamete. Okay, this is also gamete. So you have to draw a complete schematic diagram, okay, as it is shown in your textbook or the previous slide that I've shown you. So you draw it completely to get your full marks. Okay, so this is how you draw it. So parental genotype will be phenotype, black and white, correct? So genotype will be black and white, homozygous dominant and homozygous recessive. Undergo meiosis, so the gamete will be B and B. Then they undergo fertilization. Oh, sorry, this is small b. Yeah? Alright, undergo fertilization, so the genotype will be all black and the phenotype, F1 phenotype will be heterozygous. Then the F1 generation, okay, we have black and black. Okay, but the genotype is heterozygous. Okay, heterozygous. So when they undergo meiosis, the gamete will be this, B, B, B. Okay, so they undergo meiosis over here and undergo fertilization. So you can use the Punnett square to explain this, or you can just cross it using, cross it like this. All right, so you should get here B, B, and then B, 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 and B, B. All right, and the phenotype will be black, 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 and white. Okay, so the ratio will be 3 black, phenotype ratio, 3 black to 1 white. Okay, done. So here you can do formative practice 11.1 to test your understanding of this subtopic. Alright, answers will be given in the description box below, and I hope you have learned well in today's lesson. If you have any question, do ask around and I will try to get back to you with the answers. Alright, that's all for today. Thank you for watching, and please do not forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Bye bye.